Good morning. It's unprecedented times for solar on affordable housing today, not just here in New York, but across the country. Much of this growth is being driven by the Federal Inflation Reduction Act with numerous incentive programs and funding sources. As will be discussed today, a mix of federal tax credits, low interest loans, and grants are coming online, and some already are available. Moves by the federal government were capped by an Earth Day announcement just 1 week ago today of $7 billion with a B in grants to states specifically to support solar for low-income housing. Here in New York, there's an overlay of state regulations and incentives driving the growth of solar. The New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act seeks 70% clean energy statewide and 100% by 2040. With at least 35% of investments benefiting disadvantaged communities. And New York City Building Code, per local laws 92 and 94, require solar PV or a green roof on all new roofs, with New York City HPD requiring solar where feasible. And local law 97 sets a building-based carbon cap for properties above 25,000 square feet. Innovation at the local level is being driven by affordable housing organizations in this context. We have a great lineup for you today. Anasa Scott-Laude, who leads the community development consulting firm ILE Strategies, will lay out federal funding opportunities. I will briefly then summarize solar-specific funding available at the federal, state, and local levels to round out the conversation. We will then turn to two leaders to share successful solar models for affordable housing. Brendan Mitchell, Real Estate Director of the University Neighborhood Housing Program, UNHP, and David Downs, Vice President of Catholic Charities POP, Progress of People's Development Corporation, the Affordable Housing Development Affiliate, and Director of the Laudato Si Corporation, the Mission Alliance Sustainability Entity, both under the umbrella of Catholic Charities, Brooklyn and Queens. And I would like to recognize my colleague, Maureen Gapahan, who is helping out today behind the scenes, making all of this happen. And in that, I turn to you, Anasa, to take us away.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rob and Maureen, for hosting us this morning. And I'm excited to join my colleagues, Brendan and David as well. Yes, as Rob said, I'm with ILE Strategies. We support nonprofit organizations with strategic planning, with a focus on green strategies, with integrated within economic development and housing. Next slide. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of some of the recent federal awards that have come down the pike, and then so we can get over to David and Brendan, who will share about the actual models, and then I guess during Q&A I can fill gaps for people. So as many of you may know, the Biden administration recently passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It was maybe a few years ago, which included incentives and funding and grants for various awards. So incentives to develop green energy projects, including solar and building electrification, including heat pumps, as well as transportation. But we're, of course, going to focus on solar and housing. And so the Greenhouse Reduction Act is one of the grants out of one of the funding streams within the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's the largest investment within the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, for low-income and disadvantaged communities. And so there were three major pots of funding, as you can see here. And the first is the National Clean Investment Fund. There were 3 awards to some of the nation's largest intermediaries. And that award will be awarded as subawards, so that these larger entities will provide subawards to local CDFIs, or local community development institutions, credit unions, and small community banks, to provide loans to community development organizations, and even businesses and single-family homeowners who seek to integrate or retrofit their developments or build new developments, and include solar and other building electrification measures. And that funding stream can be used for debt, for equity to help make projects feasible, or hybrid of both, as well as credit enhancements. There's the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. 100% of that award has to be provided to low and moderate income communities. And again, there are these large consortium of CDFIs, such as the Appalachian Community Capital Corporation, the Climate Justice Fund, and so on. And there are networks of these very small community-based lenders that will be providing low-cost, affordable financing for green projects. And actually, I should have mentioned for the National Clean Investment Fund, 40% of that funding has to go to low and moderate income communities. For the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, it's 100% of that funding. And then, as Rob mentioned in the opening, there's Solar for All, which will fund solar across low-income communities. So lots of funding available, making projects more feasible, whether multifamily buildings or single-family homes. So next slide. And as I mentioned, this is just to show you the flow of funding. So the GGRF fund, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, is funded through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who then recently awarded CDFIs, green banks, and national nonprofit organizations the award, and then local allocations for low resource communities. So I think that summarizes that. So, and these are examples of projects. So you'll hear from two housing organizations next, but there could be community solar. So that's a group of organizations or individuals that want to build a kind of like a solar hub. There's financing for decarbonizing buildings, as you'll hear from other panelists. And there's funding for electric vehicle purchase and for businesses and individuals. Just a number of resources available, both in the form of incentives, tax credit rebates, and loans. Next slide. Here's some examples of projects that might want to combine various streams of federal funding, which typically is not allowed, but with GGRF, HUD and EPA are allowing the stacking of these funding streams to make the projects more feasible. But again, I encourage you, before you launch into these projects, that you speak with your local CDFI who may be funding you, as well as your local HUD office, to just make sure that the project is available for all these multiple streams. But for instance, you may have a multifamily rental or home ownership development, low income, or it might be a preservation project where you're repositioning the project and you want to combine HUD home funding with some form of GGRF financing to make the project, to ensure that the project has like net zero energy. And then you may, for your HUD assisted projects, so these are projects that are already in existence that have been funded with HUD 202 or project-based Section 8 funding, you are eligible for HUD's Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which can be combined with GGRF funding as well. And with the HUD funding, it can fund solar, it can fund other like low toxicity measures, so like low VOC paints and cabinets and so on, and just like a holistic approach. So in addition to your energy efficiency or energy your decarbonization targets, you can also combine it with other measures to make the building environment healthier, and so on. So that's it for now. I moved through it pretty quickly, but I want to hear from the other panels as well. I'm excited about that. So, and I can answer questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Anasa. So to build off of all of those federal various opportunities, then to have a quick cross-section of what's available for solar nationally, and then I know there are folks from outside of New York, but to use New York as our case here, the federal investment tax credit. The biggest change here with Inflation Reduction Act is that tax credit is now refundable. The IRS will cut a check to not-for-profits, government organizations, and a couple other similar groups for the full value of the tax credit. That's a 30% base incentive. There are then multiple types of bonus tax credits, and a property owner may apply for a 10% bonus tax credit if in a low-income community. If it is part of a federal affordable housing program, then there's a 20% bonus tax credit. These are competitive, but as David and Brendan will speak about, there are some clear avenues for securing those bonus tax credits. There also are a couple others for folks outside of New York City in particular. There is a 10%, and these are competitive, right? The 10 or 20%. But then as of right, there's a 10% bonus tax credit for projects in energy communities, which can be a brownfield site or other sites that used to have fossil fuel generating equipment either within those zip codes or surrounding those. That is very clearly defined. There's an available map the federal government has put out. There's a 10% bonus tax credit as well for domestically produced content in projects, but that is not clearly defined. So that's not something worth considering if you read about it. The federal EPA Solar for All $7 billion award was to 46 states across the country, New York State receiving nearly $250 million. In New York, NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, was the primary applicant, but it was in partnership, interestingly enough, with New York State DHCR and New York City Housing Preservation Department. So we can expect to see substantial resources channeled across affordable housing throughout the city and state. NYSERDA historically has your mouse is thanks. NYSERDA historically NYSERDA provides a grant for projects for additional funding for affordable housing, $1.60 to $2 a watt, covering about a third of project costs. For those for-profits in the room, there is accelerated depreciation, which may be taken advantage of as well. And in New York City, there's a property tax abatement. So all this combined means that there's a substantial amount of incentives. Lastly, there is an avoided cost of carbon. There are other compliance pathways for affordable housing, but for those that don't wish to take that alternative compliance pathway, then solar can help property owners in affordable be able to comply with Local Law 97 and avoid penalties. So this is a sort of in a quick nutshell. I don't want to belabor. We can go through more in the Q&A, but as you can see, there's a lot of resources available to make projects happen. So with that, let's talk about the projects. And Brendan, please take us away.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. I was really excited to share a little bit about some of the projects that UNHP completed this past year. We started exploring solar retrofit in some of our multifamily buildings back in 2022 was really the inception of the idea. And we reached out to Rob and his team to give us a hand sort of, so that we could nail down feasibility at these sites and figure out where we needed roofs and really get us to the point where we were ready to start work. If you could switch to the next slide, Maureen. Yeah. So we ultimately landed on 3 projects that total about 300 apartments across 7 buildings, with sort of each with their own unique situation financially, different regulatory agreements, and different roofs. I mean, these are typically pre-war buildings, lots of obstructions. They're not wide open roofs like most solar installers would prefer. So starting with Garden Street, which is in the Belmont neighborhood in the Bronx, it's an 87-unit residential building with vast hallways and public areas, and really a fairly high electric bill that we were struggling with as utility rates were increasing. And so we landed on a overall system size of 34,000 kilowatt hours annually, to offset the about 110% of the usage at the project. The building doesn't have a regulatory agreement. It's what a lot of people call naturally occurring affordable housing, with the average rent about $900 across those 87 units. And so we're constantly, trying to reduce operating expenses there and be able to do repairs and maintain the building. Ultimately, we kicked off construction in 2023, and the total cost was about $107,000. Because the building didn't have a regulatory agreement, we qualified for about $1 a kilowatt on the New York State NYSERDA incentives, and federally, that refundable tax credit really was, would change the entire financial pro forma for us, because we were able to recoup the money in about 3.5 years. The project also pays full real estate taxes, and so we were able to take care of the New York City incentives as well, and that comes over 4 years. So we're utilizing everything we can for this project. It would have been nice if we were able to get a little bit more from NYSERDA and a little bit more from federally, but it just didn't work out for that one. We also were able to apply for a $10,000 grant from the Federal Home Loan Bank in New York, which helped us with the feasibility study and some of the project monitoring costs throughout. You could switch to the next one. Yep. So the next project we did was the Wilton. Again, very old building, mixed use. It's 32 units with 32 residential with 6 commercial units, very low rents, and just a constant battle between rising insurance costs and maintenance costs and water and things like that. And so while it's a small building and there was some contractors that weren't totally interested in taking on a smaller project like this, being able to offset over 100% of the electrical usage is really gonna help the project, because we're able to reinvest that money right back into the building and apartment renovations and kitchens and public area renovations. This was a smaller project, so the total cost was about $67,000. Because it does have a regulatory agreement, we were able to take advantage of $1.60 a watt with NYSERDA, which came out to about $20,000. And then we also qualified for the low-income communities bonus, which Rob and his team helped us apply for, and so that brought us up to about $27,000 in federal incentives. And then, while the project does have a regulatory agreement and a tax abatement, we do still pay taxes on the commercial stores. And so we're able to take advantage of the New York City abatement as well, and take that over the course of 4 years. So, while the project is only about 13 kilowatts, the payback period is pretty incredible. It's about 2 years, actually a little bit less, and we're going to offset the supers apartment and the common areas, and be able to reinvest that money into the building. You could hit the next slide. Thanks. The last project was the largest. It's a 4-building project, mainly in the Mars Heights neighborhood. 161 residential units with 4 community facility units, one of which we use as an organization to do, to provide different resources in the community. And this one was, I think it's always a little bit tougher, when you're spread across 4 sites, just to coordinate. But we did apply for that Federal Home Loan Bank grant through Apple Bank, and we received it, and we were able to use that for ongoing monitoring the project throughout, which was really helpful because of the 4 sites. Larger project. It's about 136 kilowatts. Total cost was about $600,000, and we were aiming to offset 110% of the usage at these buildings. These buildings also have laundry rooms. Some of them have electric dryers, 4 superintendent units, lots of basement, lots of hallways, exterior lights, and and the community facility unit, which we use as well. And so this was, by far the largest federal incentive. This project qualified for the low-income communities bonus, which was incredible. So that was about $240,000. And then it also has a regulatory agreement and an HDC mortgage, and so we were able to take full advantage of the NYSERDA funding, which came to about $220,000. And because it's at the tail end of its regulatory agreement, we're paying significant property taxes at this project, and so we're able to take advantage of the New York City money as well, which totals about $90,000. Again, this is a 4-building project that has a payback period of under 3 years, which is just incredible. When we started looking at solar in these old buildings, we really were seeing closer to 10 years, and that's before the Inflation Reduction Act and before those federal credits became refundable. But once they did, it really changed everything, and so it became much more possible to do these projects. And as part of it, we did 4 new roofs on all 4 of these buildings, which they really needed. And ultimately the electrical savings is going to pay for those roofs in the years to come. I think that's it.
Thank you, Brennan. David, would you like to tell us about your initiative and your model?
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here. Have worked with Rob and the team for quite a few years as we've been navigating the solar landscape post IRA, and it's really, I think, rewarding to hear from different panelists and their experience and sort of what's out there right now, just how much is available to tap into. And we, Catholic Charities and the Laudato Si Corporation have really, sort of taken this, opportunity, and we do feel like it is a once in a lifetime opportunity, or maybe once in a life cycle of our buildings opportunity, to hit the road and really start building out as much as we can in this period. So I'll take a step back and first want to thank Rob and Maureen for coordinating this discussion. I think it's really helpful for a variety of the different affordable housing groups that are on the call today. It's good to see different folks from different New York and beyond affordable housing development groups. Catholic Charities, Progress of People's Development Corporation, and Catholic Charities Brooklyn of Queens it has a long history of providing affordable housing and social services in the 2 boroughs. Since 2019, we have focused on building that out and sort of complementing that work through the Laudato Si Corporation, which, as Rob had mentioned in his intro at the beginning, is a mission-aligned sustainability organization that we created as a nonprofit under Catholic Charities POP Development, which is the affordable housing affiliate of the diocese and Catholic Charities. And just a little bit of background here, I think it's helpful to understand there's a lot of different objectives, there's a lot of different data metrics that have been thrown out in the conversation, but I think setting place for where we began, we really wanted to look at this as a way to tie our affordable housing work with quite a large portfolio. We have at this point about 40 buildings in the two boroughs with about 35 to 3,700 units, some in development, some in renovation right now. And we looked at that sort of portfolio as a place to leverage sustainability, but also ways to connect our residents and our sort of our efforts to be not only bringing in sustainability, resiliency, but also to allow our residents to tap into those benefits as well. So a little bit of background on Laudato Si Corporation. We used the encyclical that Pope Francis had put out in 2015 that really sort of calls the entire Catholic organization and beyond to really think about the earth as a special, unique resource and as basically our common home. And that can go beyond the auspices of the Catholic organization. We've sort of took two major points here I have up on the screen, combating climate change and protecting the environment, and sort of our shared responsibilities for the earth and humanity. Maureen, do you mind skipping to the next slide? Thank you. So taking that charge, we've sort of built out the work over two phases since 2019. The first phase, which I'll just sort of set the stage with here, but move on quickly to phase two. We developed that basically as a pilot using 3 of our existing buildings. It was a community solar model. So just to kind of lay out the terminology of the vocab here, community solar means that the energy that's being produced on the buildings goes back out to the grid and then comes back to an entity. In this case, it was Laudato Si Corporation, as a credit for the solar that's being produced and to help take some of the stress off of the grid here in New York City. Again, we used 3 buildings and we did self-finance this. So we were trying to really sort of take a step back from a lot of, at that point in time, complicated models that would have involved loans, solar tax credits, and other types of incentives. And really just try to think about, is this the right approach for our organization? And how can we prove the case that this is, a right way to keep moving forward? And at that point, there were also a lot of other pieces at play in terms of, regulatory changes that were happening, but that had not been affected, like the local laws that Rob talked about, as well as just other types of, changes to the building code in future programs. So we took that opportunity. Again, it took us a few years to build it out. And by 2022, we had the 3 pilots up and running across the sites. And then at that point, we were also able to enroll our residents, which are all predominantly low income, to be able to use some of the credits that we were generating as Con Ed benefits. So in some cases, if those residents enrolled directly, they receive a 10% credit on their Con Ed bill, which were, our residents and, our property managers and, other folks in our network have been really happy to see, and our residents are seeing the proof of what's actually been, put up on the roof of their building that they might not have otherwise have known, was there. With phase 2, this goes more to the context of the conversation today and leveraging the IRA benefits. We've worked with Rob and his team since 2022. Again, started with the community solar model in a completely different direction. And then when the IRA legislation came out in mid-22, we started to assess, what are maybe other ways that we could use the IRA funds to sort of build more, to build, a more richer outcome or outputs of the project in terms of financial benefits to our buildings directly, to our residents through programs, as well as, to the grid. These are now all going to be behind the meter projects that we are building going forward. So that energy will stay with the building. It will help to reduce those buildings' energy, electricity needs for common areas. But also it has the same impact of taking some of the demand off the extended grid here in New York. I think Rob, covered sort of the big points in terms of the tax credits. We will be receiving up to 50% of the credits. Brendan is sort of coming in at an interesting point where he had buildings ready to go and was able to apply that, sort of day one. We will be building these prospectively going forward. So these projects are all sort of in the queue for later this year and into early 25. And I think the last piece that's important to drive here is just that, the benefits to the residents will come in a different form. Here we will have a set aside pot of funds, over the pro forma, the term of the projects, which is 25 years. Those benefits, will come back to the buildings. We will work sort of on a case-by-case basis with each building to determine the best use of those funds to directly benefit residents. That can be, in some cases, as simple as, helping with M&O cost in the building that may be, suffering for other reasons. Insurance is a big piece that we talked about here. Perhaps other types of utilities that are not in line. But also, I think more creatively, areas where our residents might be able to benefit in types of sustainability programming that's on site and through our supportive services network. So I think that covers the big picture of our work. I'm really, interested and excited to do a little bit more Q&A with the audience and to answer more questions, both metric or qualitatively. So I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Thank you, David. And we'd love to hear your questions. We've left ample time for Q&A. So please go ahead and ask away. The panelists are here to be a resource. I'll get us started. I'll start with a question for David and Brendan as well. And the question is around scale, right? So a lot of retrofits for affordable housing is still relatively new. How did you make the decision to, in David, your case, scale up from 3 sites to an additional 12? And Brendan, how did you go essentially from 0 to 7?
I'll dive in first, just piggybacking on my comments. Again, just to, I think set the stage with the fact that 3 buildings, we made that determination starting with 40 buildings, and we narrowed it down back in 2019, 2020. And that was, taking a comprehensive look at our portfolio, which I think is the first step for any organization, nonprofit or for-profit, just what, type of assets do you have? What is the opportunity? That allows you to, kind of set the bar of, what your buildings and portfolio can produce, what other regulatory and, sort of barriers you might have. Brendan mentioned, replacing 4 roofs on the buildings they've been working on. That's a major undertaking, and that's not necessarily, something that happens quickly if your organization, or the property team has not been sort of working on that, full steam ahead. So going from 3 to 12, Rob, I mean, for us was understanding, we had gone through the first 3. We saw sort of the pros and the cons and, the other trials and tribulations of actually installing. I think our team felt much more comfortable with the process, and the actual return was happening. I think literally turning on the switch, seeing the credits flow, allowed our leadership and sort of, our team as a whole to better understand that, this is real. And that there's going to be, a lot of other benefits that, are beyond just sort of the financial side. I think the other thing that really pushed us to go faster from 3 to 12 was, just, sort of quadrupling our approach with phase 2 was the IRA, to be quite frank. This is an opportunity to tap into resources that was not, there 5 years ago. The landscape in the solar market changes very quickly. So we're really trying to capture that right now. And, we're actually going to be trying to dive into a phase 3, to try to, capture as much of, the rest of our buildings that makes sense at this point.
Thank you, David. Brendan?
Thanks, David. Yeah. I mean, for us, really, it was you know, it was a goal of our board of directors to really, you know, reduce our carbon footprint in a lot of these projects, and we sort of dove in, thinking that the payback was going to take a lot longer than it looks like it's going to. And at the time, that was truly okay, because it was better than I think the first time we, you know, really tried to do this in our portfolio. It was maybe 2015, and it was like 10 to 15 years to get that money back, and you know, it just, it wasn't possible. But by the time 2022 rolled around, I mean, we were willing to wait 7 years, you know, or 8 years if that's what it took. You know, as far as, you know, going from 0 to 7, you know, we looked at about 20 buildings, and you know, we kind of backed into that number. You know, we looked at which projects, you know, had a little bit of cash on hand or in reserves to utilize, you know, for these projects. You know, because the incentives are great, but you know, in our case, you know, we did need to buy new roofs, you know, and we did need to put some money up to get going. You know, we looked at, you know, obstructions. You know, out of those 20 buildings, a bunch of them have cell towers and different things, and so for ultimately for the 7 that we selected, you know, that those roofs were unused space, and you know, it you know, it seemed like a shame to keep them wide open. And you know, they were coming up on roof replacement, and you know, we you know, because of local law 192 or 194, I mean, we were going to have to do solar anyway. So why not just be proactive and do it all at the same time? You know, the next stage for us is probably a more difficult project, which is on a, you know, a taller building, you know, going with a canopy style array opposed to ballasted, and incorporating battery backup. You know, at least for us, you know, we're a fairly small organization, you know, compared to probably some of the ones on the call, and so you know, we kind of dipped our toe in, you know, with the ballasted systems on some of the lower buildings, and you know, got through the construction process, got through, you know, the financials, and we're a little bit more comfortable doing a larger project, and that's what we're hoping to do in 24, 25.
Thank you, Brendan. Now, I have one question for Anasa before turning to we have questions coming from the attendees, but I do think there's an important piece that both Brendan and David were able to essentially self-finance, look at reserves and so forth. But Anasa, you pointed to a lot of funding sources and financing sources, a tremendous amount, right? $27 billion federally, and then some. So how would you recommend organizations position themselves to be able to capture those funding sources? You know, how could it help to maybe get projects to more projects to happen that might not otherwise be able to move forwards?
Sure. I think, so Rob, you and Maureen have been working with me on a project that's coming down the pike. And I think it's helpful to just work with a consultant that can do some initial, just like a basic feasibility analysis. So just taking a look at your portfolio. I think both David and Brendan mentioned, like looking at what your portfolio, what you have, the financing structure, and all of the, you know, regulatory issues and so on, that you may come up against, and then just kind of go from there. This GGRF, which is one of the grants that the $27 billion allocation out of the IRA, is just getting started. They just announced the awardees about a month ago. And so funding is anticipated to be flowing sometime towards the end of the year. And that will, as I mentioned, come mostly in the form of financing, some equity, debt, hybrid models, and credit enhancements. But you also have like other aspects of IRA, which I believe David and Brendan tapped into, which provides tax credits and other, you know, forms of equity for the capital for the project. And you have incentives through programs like NYSERDA if you're in New York State, or whatever your regional state and municipal agencies are offering, depending on where you are. I'd look into that. But it really moves the process forward, working with a consultant that kind of knows the landscape and can help you get started. And I don't know his capacity, but or their capacity, but Rob and Maureen have done a lot of work with, and I'm not promoting your pro bono services, but they do a lot of groundwork for you up front, or it can kind of steer you towards resources to help get the ball rolling. They're super committed to the work. So I highly recommend that. And as GGRF rolls out, the CDFI community will be a great resource of information, as well as I think over time, the HUD program officers and just HUD staff will be, local folks will be a resource as well, if you are eligible for those funding streams. So yeah, that would be I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Thank you. I promise that was not a leading question.
I
appreciate I
Yeah.
appreciate the kind words. But no, I do think it underscores, you know, the in all three cases, the importance of understanding your buildings, your portfolio. This is the thread I'm hearing, right? And choosing the right sites and the right projects at the right time. So certainly what Anas is referring to is we're now doing quite a bit of work up front to simply help housing providers understand, you know, how they might want to move forwards and what those right sites might be before even making any sort of financial commitment. It's important right now with the opportunities in front of us.
I also want to mention the community solar. I'm not sure the status of that project, but WEAC did a project with 11 HDFCs that came together to do a joint community solar project. So sometimes partnering with other agencies or buildings, if you're in a HDFC co-op or TIL building, that might be a possibility as well. But yeah.
So staying on the numbers for a moment, and then we can on solar, then we can go to a couple other things. We have some great questions from the participants. I'll start with one. I think this is partially for you, Brendan, from Dylan Long. And he wants to understand if your numbers are real, if you will. Am I understanding this correctly, that the cost of one of these was around $600K and the funding received was around $580? The cost was completely covered here. Is that supposed to be repaid?
So yeah, good question, because it doesn't seem real. Yeah, so there's a couple of things at play. I mean, ultimately the cost was the incentives really amounted to about 550,000 of that 600. You know, not all of that comes back all at once. So just going through sort of one by one. So, you know, on the federal funding, you know, we do have to wait until after we file to get those refundable credits. So there, you know, there is a little bit of a delay on that, which means you either have to get some type of bridge financing in place or self-fund, you know, which we were able to do through project reserves that were healthy and not being utilized at the time. I will say that the New York State funding, the NYSERDA money, is very fast. Within a couple of weeks, those checks came in, and we were able to sort of replenish our operating account. It was actually a couple of weeks from completion. And then on the New York City incentives, those are given back in the form of a property tax credit through the Department of Finance. And they come back over the course of 4 years. So that 89,000 is broken up into 4 credits on our property tax payment. So that doesn't come back all at once. You know, it does take a little bit of time. But you know, by the 4th year, it's all paid back. And then you know, and in our case, you know, we're also getting the electrical savings in those first 3-4 years as well, which is you know, helping us to recoup our money.
Thanks, Brendan.
I hope that's helpful.
And David, I think you could take this next question. With the LIHTC project, are the solar tax credits claimed when an org files their tax return, or is it added to the housing tax credits by the syndicator to sell to investors?
So that would be something that is a little bit separate from the conversation today, but just to, address the question, it is part of your tax credit investment agreement with the syndicator. Likely it is your same LIHTC syndicator that would be doing the ITC. Our experience with this has been on new construction only, where we are doing a new construction LIHTC project. We are projecting a solar, benefit that the investor is able to recoup, and they would add that to their LIHTC agreement. So it will come in, the form of a 15-year compliance period. The funds will be, dispersed in different sort of milestones. But there's many different ways that can be structured. And I think there's a lot of context to discuss there, and happy to talk offline if that's helpful.
Thanks, David. And I think to build off of that, then really there's two different financing worlds for solar on affordable housing. There's new construction, right? And that's where the solar tax credits could be essentially bundled with other housing tax credits through the tax credit syndicator. But for retrofits, then that relationship, David, that you're not opening up, right? That you're now separately financing with the retrofits, where through direct pay, where your properties or your special purpose entity is going to get those tax credits, right? So those are really apples and oranges with new development as opposed to the retrofits.
There could be a future world where LIHTC is actually being used on preservation projects, but right now that is not something that is being syndicated from a bond perspective, at least here in New York.
Right. Thanks.
I would just add that the projects that we shared about, they had all exited the compliance period, so we didn't have to deal with that.
And I think that's another important point, Brendan and Rob, is that regulatory compliance and making sure if you are going onto a project with an existing LIHTC agreement, retrofitting that adds a wrinkle or sort of a layer of review and approval. We did do that in our phase one. They were actually all three in existing LIHTC agreements with investors, different, and that required a case-by-case approval by each investor to allow us to add the solar to the building, even though the building was not in any way receiving the benefit of the solar because it was a community solar model. So there's, unfortunately, with 11 minutes in this conversation, there's a lot of nuance that we could dive into. But I think everything that we've talked about today is not necessarily adding in all those complications at this point.
Thank you. Now to a technical question for Claire. Do you have any projects where solar is not feasible? If yes, what were the barriers, regulatory and financing restrictions, or the roof itself?
I'll jump in. Hey, Claire. Yes, we did. In our 40 building portfolio, there was definitely some buildings where solar is not feasible due to, from a physical perspective, physical barriers, obstructions, sizing, and other types of right-of-ways that need to exist on the roof area for safety and compliance from an FDNY and other type of utility perspective. I would say though, of our 40 buildings that we looked at, there was only, I'd say, 5 of those buildings that were sort of just said, no, we're not able to look at. Now, you may, a few years ago when we were looking at it from a cost perspective, there were some that were just not cost feasible because the investment was not necessarily something that we would be recouping in less than a 15-year period. So I think there's, a financial sort of objective test, and then there's sort of the first part is just physically, can we do this? And then the other thing I would add is just from a regulatory perspective, we talked about the LIHTC compliance. That's, I think, relatively easy. Most investors are okay with that at this point. We did run into some issues with at a larger level HUD approval of projects, and we sort of backtracked from those. And I think the approach there needs to just be one where it is being driven with a clear resident benefit in mind that can be equilaterally sort of applied to all residents, not necessarily just to those that would enroll in, say, a community solar program. So we've taken a step back from that to retool that, and we're looking at that for future projects. I don't know, Brendan, if you had any other context you want to add.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have, out of sort of the 20 or 25 really buildings that we started with, we have such a wide range of 8 units to 120 units that for the smaller buildings, it didn't make sense for us, because of what David said, access issues or obstructions on the roof, bulkheads, that type of thing. And then, really the biggest thing was, financially, some of the projects, especially in this sort of post-COVID time, they're dealing with really high operating costs and insurance being the biggest one. We could have a separate webinar for that. But where we couldn't even wrap our head around, taking on a project where we would have to lay out some money until the incentives came through. But even the smaller buildings that we sort of spoke about, they're not huge solar arrays, but they do make sense, and they are going to benefit the building in a big way financially.
Thanks, Brendan. Question from Jennifer Kaminsky. To get the additional LMI adder, assuming this is the federal bonus tax credit, what are the ways to show that the benefits are going to residents? Does it have to be community solar? If the building is master metered and electricity's in the rent, would that qualify? I think you each participated in different bonus tax credit programs, so it may be instructive. Perhaps Brendan, since your program was the simplest, if you go first around the program that you participated in, and then David, yours has some more sort of requirements you can follow on.
Sure. So the 2 projects that qualified for that adder, both of them are 501c3s. They're both nonprofit owned, and we didn't have to point to anything and say this is where the money is being reinvested to benefit the tenants, which was helpful because again, in this day and age, I mean, you could be sort of putting out metaphorical fires, every year as things come up. So we didn't have to say this is going to social services or this is going to residents, electric bill. We don't really have many projects where we pay the electricity for the residents. For the most part, folks pay their own. Yeah.
Thanks. And David, do you want to share your experience?
I would just say that, with the IRA's guidance, which took, 15 months to be released and, for the applications to open up, they did spend a lot of time, sort of delineating different ways to apply the benefits to residents and to the buildings as a whole. And we took sort of a very broad brushed approach of saying that, it would be applied back to building operations. But that allows you then to sort of make, your own decision on how that can be applied in the form of supportive services, resident programming, or really, fixing other parts of the building that allow the solar to work better, or, just allow the building to operate at an even keel.
Thanks, David. And the big difference is that the low income tax credit is 10%, and there's no requirements associated with that. For the 20%, a project needs to be a participant in a federal housing program. And then there are certain requirements for benefits to be shared. Let it be a community solar project or behind the meter, master meter. The calculation is the same of about 12.5% of the total value of a project needs to be shared with tenants for the life of the project for 25-year time frame. Questions are coming in, but we are at 10:56. So here's how we're going to do this. We have more questions than time allows to be answered, and are happy to send around responses across afterwards to everyone who participated in this webinar. I think we could probably go another hour the way questions are coming in, but it's great because it's a point of conversation. Otherwise, I would love to give it to each panelist to have a last word on what they would recommend for someone who's considering going solar, whether they should or they shouldn't. What questions should they ask? Or if you have some other last note that you want to leave us on, it's wild card.
I'm happy to go if.
Brendan.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I would just sort of end with saying, you know, that the projects that, you know, that we completed, you know, these are buildings where over the years they're very old buildings, you know, but over the years we've invested in high efficiency boilers and LED lighting and motion sensors and energy efficient appliances, and so we sort of got, you know, as far as we could with those sort of low-hanging fruit measures. And so solar was really the next frontier for us. And you know, as I mentioned, you know, Rob gave us a presentation in 2015, and you know, it was not even a consideration at the time. And so I feel like we waited until the right time, and you know, it was the natural next step for us. There's no more you know, incandescent light bulbs to change and oil burners, so to speak. So, you know, if you feel like you're at that point where you've done everything you can, you know, you know, going solar is you know, it's an undertaking, I think, but you know, it looks like the rewards far outweigh the work that goes into it.
Thanks, Brendan. I would just say one of the questions, you know, asked about the calculus of, you know, decision making. And I think as this conversation today has shown, there's a lot of different inputs into the calculus of, you know, decision making and options. And that might be overwhelming. And what I've always said about our work is that as much as we'd love to spend, you know, 100% of our time focused on this, you know, the reality is that this is tertiary, or, you know, sort of added on to our full-time job as affordable housing, you know, developers. And, you know, we've taken that on and we've added it into, you know, sort of our workload wholeheartedly, because we, you know, think that it's without, you know, any doubt imperative to do this to support the portfolio. So it may be challenging. You may need to find, you know, staff in different sort of capacities and, you know, assistance with, you know, good consultants that are here today that will help you sort of get to that point. But I do think it is, you know, highly worth the, you know, the time, effort, and, you know, return on investment to do it. You know, right now these credits, you know, that sounds like a fire drill, but, you know, these credits will not be here forever, and we don't know what the, you know, the future looks like in terms of the landscape for supporting projects like this. So go for it today if you can.
Thank you. Anasa.
Yep, just echoing David. There for GGRFs, there's a 7-year window to spend down the $27 billion. So that means getting projects ready and building capacity for nonprofits to, you know, to do the work required. So I highly recommend to, you know, just start exploring what you have in your portfolio and link up with nonprofit organizations and consultants that are helping to, you know, helping to figure out feasibility and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate everybody's time, and feel free to follow up afterwards. We will be sharing a recording of this webinar after the fact. And if you have any questions for anyone in particular as well, then we'll circulate them afterwards. Hopefully this is a start of a conversation, or with many of you, a continuation of a conversation around how to keep creating affordable housing. So thank you and have a great morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.